Alright, hey guys, I wanted to talk to you about Psalm 79 today. Read the whole chapter today. It's not very long. I think it's only 13 verses, but one of the things that really kind of stood out to me was when he starts off, he's talking about kind of how they're taking all this persecution and they're praying for God's help in the matter and stuff like that. But there was a couple of verses that really stood out. Number one, in verse 9, he says, "Help us, O God of our salvation, for the glory of your name, and deliver us and provide atonement for our sins for your name's sake." And the two things that really kind of stand out about this verse is, "Help us, O God of our salvation, for the glory of your name." This is all being done for God's name. Deliver us and provide atonement for our sins for your name's sake. Not just for the sake of rescuing us, not for just the sake of removing us from the trials and the tribulations that we're dealing with, from the persecution of the world, not just for the sake of saving me, myself, my flesh, and my own gain, but save me for your name's sake. And the idea is that he's talking about these other nations that are coming against him, and he talks about in one of the previous verses about how, why should these other nations say, oh, they trusted in God? Why should these other nations basically kind of blaspheme you and come against you and bring your name low as a result of us being punished? So I would pray that you would atone for our sins, that you would make up for our shortcoming, and that you would redeem us from all that for your name's sake, so that these other nations wouldn't look on us and see our lowly, state and kind of hold that against you. So a lot of this is being done for your name's sake. The next verse that really kind of stood out to me was verse 11. It says, "Let the groaning of the prisoner come before you according to the greatness of your power. Preserve those who are appointed to die." And that last phrase is something that I really kind of wanted to focus on. He's talking about how they're going through this persecution, they're going through this trial and stuff, but I want you to hear that last phrase, preserve those who are appointed to die. There are some who are going to die. There are some who in the midst of their persecution, they're going to ultimately succumb to the physical aspects of death. But that's not what he's praying for here. He's not praying, Lord, save me from death. He's saying, Lord, preserve those who are appointed to die. Now, what's he talking about preserving them? He's talking about the fact, Lord, let them not fall away. And this is the same thing that when Peter was faced with, Jesus had told Peter that, Satan has asked to basically to sift you as wheat, but I have prayed that your faith would not fail. Notice that Jesus didn't pray to the Father that, well, Peter, I'm going to pray so that you don't go through this persecution. Because the persecution that you go through may be part of God's will, and it may be something that God is using to stretch or to grow your character, or to remove impurities from your life, to remove sin or pride or self-righteousness or things like that. Jesus didn't pray that Peter would have the trial or the persecution removed from his life. He just prayed that your faith would not fail. And this is kind of what the psalmist is praying here. He's saying, preserve those who are appointed to die. They're going to die. This has been appointed through God's sovereignty that these people are ultimately going to end up succumbing. But I pray, Lord, that they would not fall away from you even in the midst of their death. And it reminds me of the story of, I think he was the bishop of Smyrna, Polycarp. He was actually a disciple under the Apostle John. And they ultimately, the guy was like 80-something years old or 90-something years old. They tied him to a stake, and they ultimately tell him to renounce Christ. And he was like, 83 years have I lived for Christ, and he's done nothing against me. How can I deny the name of my Lord? And the idea is that his faith was such that even though he's being tied to a stake and he's fixing to be burned, it didn't matter. God was preserving his faith. He ultimately would end up dying, although not being burned at the stake. They ended up having to stab him to kill him. But the point being is that even though he was appointed to die, his faith did not fail, and that's kind of what the psalmist is talking about here. So I wanted to kind of point out those two verses in particular. You can read the whole chapter. It's not very long, like I said, to kind of get the general context of it. But those were a couple of phrases that really stood out in Psalm 79 that I think we really need to kind of focus on. So, you guys, God bless.